Ladies and gentlemen, invited guests, it's with great pleasure that I invite you and welcome you into the gorgeous Guildhall this Tuesday morning, a lovely mild, kind of verging on sunny Tuesday morning. We're here to celebrate the launch this year of the Lifelong Learning Festival. It's all part, of course, as you know, of Derry City and Strabane's membership of UNESCO's Global Network of Learning Cities. My name is Eve Blair, and for those who don't know me, I usually put you to sleep on BBC Radio Ulster and BBC Radio Foyle. I'm a broadcaster and presenter, but it is just my pleasure to be your host this morning. Today's event, it's a celebration, really. That's why we're all here. The Learning Festival will take place this year from the 25th to the 29th of April. And I can imagine a few people have that ingrained in their diary at this stage. So it was back in 2019. Little did we know what was ahead of us, I think, back in 2019. That Derry and Strabane joined the UNESCO Global Network of Learning Cities. If you're not too familiar with it, I can imagine many of you are. It's really connecting over 200 cities around the world, just committed to using learning to improve the lives of those living in those areas. Using learning really is a building block to create better lives for citizens. So it's all about lifelong learning for everyone, across every sector, every community, and indeed for all ages as well, importantly. So today's event will commence very, very shortly. We have some wonderful speakers for you. We'll be introducing you to the speakers as we go along this morning. And also some entertainment. You couldn't be in the Guildhall without a wee bit of entertainment. Sadly, no Derry girls in the building this time. I think Graham was hoping to see the Derry girls again. Big night for the Derry girls tonight. But we've lots of brilliant entertainment coming up for you. And also coming up towards the end of the event this morning, we give you your chance to get involved, just to ask questions in a panel discussion. It's also a chance just to share everybody's experiences as well, which always goes down pretty well too. And just to make you aware, we're very lucky this morning to have our signers with us this morning too. Directly after our event in the Peace Garden in Foyle Street, we plan to host, in collaboration with Hands That Talk, a record-breaking attempt to teach as many people as possible just a simple bit of sign language. And I was just saying to Michelle, you know, it's something that I think a lot of us, we really want to learn more about. So it's your opportunity maybe to just learn a little bit and be part of the record-breaking attempt. We'd love you to be part of it. But we have a real treat for you this morning to get us underway. I'd like to introduce you to the dancers from Mulholland School of Irish Dancing, live here in the Guildhall. We're just so lucky to have such a wealth of talent amongst our young people. I know perhaps they might be kind of in preparation for the feis or a few other things coming up this week. But I think a round of applause for the dancers this morning of the Mulholland School of Irish Dancing. We've managed to trace the dancers. I think they were doing a little bit of last minute practicing downstairs, so they'll be with you very shortly. And as you can imagine, some of them are quite young as well, so we'll give them a nice warm welcome when they come. I can imagine a little bit daunting for some of them, maybe performing in front of some people. in the Guildhall for the first time. So we'll give them a nice warm welcome. Sadly, I'm not an Irish dancer myself, or I would give you a little jigger reel at this stage, but hopefully they should be with us very shortly. So just a quick look ahead. We have quite a lot, as I said, to come for you. We have some lovely stories just about what learning has meant to people and people's different kind of journeys through where they have got to in life. As we like to say, not every journey is simply from A to B. Not everyone has the support from a young age to go through one way to another. So everybody's experience is different. So I think that's what we're here as well, celebrating this morning, just how varied that can be, and with a little bit of support, and I suppose as well with someone who can believe in you. Everything, the possibilities are endless really with that as well. So I think I hear a few taps out in the hallway there. There we go. So a warm welcome, as I say, to the dancers from the Mulholland School of Irish Dancing.
I was eating.
Many thanks to the Mulholland School of Dancing, just fabulous. And I think just in the spirit of maybe this morning, you know, it's never too late to learn how to Irish dance, I think. But yeah, big thanks to the guys there, just brilliant. Now, next to the stage this morning, please welcome the Mayor of Derry City and Strabane District Council, Alderman Graham Work.
Thank you, Eve. And that's my first time seeing the Irish dancers in here since COVID, but a big round of applause for them. It's so good. As Mayor of Derry City and Strabane, Learning Cities, I want to extend a warm welcome to you this morning, and especially want to welcome our Learning City colleagues from Belfast, Dublin, Cork and Limerick. Today, we're here to launch the Derry and Strabane second lifelong learning festival, and there will be up to 100 free events available across the city and district during the festival. From the learning how to grow your own vegetables, learn how to play musical instruments and much more, and even learning how to Irish dance. It's going to be loads of in the festival, and check out the festival's brochures, packs in front of you. I know many of you attending this morning are hosting those events in your area, and I want to extend a very warm welcome to you and all you being part of this excellent event. The theme of the festival this year is the power of lifelong learning, and studies have shown that lifelong learning is better equipped to adapt and changes to the environment. The benefit of lifelong learning go beyond skills development and employment. During the pandemic, there was huge demands in type of learning, how to cook, cycle, or finally take up digital challenges. Personally, enjoyment and feeling the freedom achievements that would benefit us. They reduce the social isolation. These are all great benefits and one of the engage in lifelong learning. Informal learning plays a crucial role engaging those individuals through education and the employment market. In many cases, learning events hosted in your local community and familiar surroundings can offer citizens opportunity to take up vital first steps back in education and learning. We want to encourage you to take up the learning challenges this April, and whether you're learning to develop new skills to grow your career, lifelong learning can reveal the impact of both your professional and personal development. We are delighted to have two lifelong learners here, Karen O'Reilly and Kieran Lockhart today, and who will share their lifelong learning journey with us. What challenges they have faced and how they have overcome those challenges. The panel of representatives from each of the Irish Network Learning Cities will discuss how the statutory agencies, local and central government can and help support the learning in our neighbourhoods. After this event, please all join us in the Peace Garden, where we attempt to teach as many people as possible how to sign language. Well, without further ado, let's get the discussion started. I'd like to invite Michelle up on the stage for the Learning Region Coordinator from Derry Strabane, who will introduce the next items. Thank you. Bye,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Really appreciate that. Unfortunately, Karen O'Reilly can't be here with us this morning. She's not feeling well. So, without further ado, good morning, everybody. It's great to see you here. It's great to see just more than just heads, but to see full bodies and to be able to speak to each other. Our next item on the agenda is very close to my heart and really what learning is all about. Promoting and supporting lifelong learning for all of our citizens. As a UNESCO Learning City, our goal is to help signpost people to networks and platforms that enable them to engage in a positive way with learning, either formal or informal. This morning, Kieran Lockhart from Spring Social Prescribing is going to tell us, has kindly agreed to share his learning journey with us this morning. Kieran worked in retail for many years and has returned to full-time education later in life. Kieran will tell us about the challenges both he and his wife faced and shared both financially and personally during that time. Kieran, totally delighted to welcome you up on the stage. Please come up here and tell us your learning journey, and I really, really appreciate it. Thanks.
Hi everyone, bear with me. I printed off my speech in a panic this morning and the font's absolutely minuscule, so in the spirit of lifelong learning, if anyone's teaching classes on how to use printers, I'll sign up for those classes. But the folks, just to kick us off, whenever Michelle asked me to speak, one of the first things that came to mind was an old Chinese proverb that I had heard. And the saying is that the best day to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the next best day is today. And I think that pearl of wisdom really applies to learning as well too. As we get older, it's easy to lament about the lost opportunities of our youth. You know, you might tell yourself things like, if only I had applied for that course whenever I was younger, or I've left it too late. These are all things that people tell themselves, and I have to admit, these are the things I told myself as well too in the past. I spent most of my adult life working in retail, almost by accident. I dropped out of university early to work as a basketball coach for an American charity that set up in Northern Ireland at the time. The work was really rewarding and it paid really, really well, especially for an 18, 19-year-old. So I wasn't too worried about education at the time. But as with many worthwhile pursuits, when the charity moved overseas and the job was no longer available, I found myself without any industry-specific qualifications to fall back on. And I got a job in retail to tide me over. Little did I know at the time, working in retail would tide me over for longer than I expected. Life had simply moved on. To fast forward slightly, in the intervening years, I met my wife, Kate, who had a great career as a nurse, and we would eventually start a family together. One day over the kitchen table, Kate and I were discussing what we would do in terms of childcare once she returned to work following her maternity leave. As we researched the costs involved in hiring a childminder, we quickly realised that my salary at the time wouldn't cover the costs. At that point, Kate asked would I be willing to stay at home for the preschool years to care for our growing family, which now included 2 young girls. Initially, I was hesitant. As a man, I didn't believe that child raising was solely a mother's responsibility. My wife and I work as a team, at least most days. But I know men don't normally take on this role, and all too often it's women who are left to juggle their career aspirations with the reality of raising children. But as my wife sagely pointed out, we would just have to do simply what was best for our family, and so began my time as a stay-at-home dad. The term stay-at-home dad or parent, it really irks me, but I'm not sure what we should replace it with. I think the majority of parents know that in order to give your child the best possible start, you're never really at home. You're out and about, you're visiting parks, libraries, forests, anywhere you think that'll help your child's development. When people stopped to speak to me when I was out and about with the children, they always seemed pleasantly surprised that I was flying solo without my wife being there with me. Having visited every play park in town, swimming pools, and with regular visits to places like the library, I tried to do as much as I could to do a decent job as a parent. And whilst overall I enjoyed this time, I found that I was starting to become isolated. All of my friends worked, and whenever my wife returned from her job, I was so eager for any possible adult conversation. I'll never forget the panic I felt one day in a shopping centre with a child who needed changed. I was looking at the signs for the toilets, and the stick person had the baby changing symbol, but they were wearing a skirt, so I wasn't sure if I was allowed to enter or not. Whilst I knew my role raising children was important, I was beginning to yearn once again for the world of work and the social benefits that come with it. During this time, the media was my link to the outside world. Reading local newspapers and listening to the likes of BBC Radio Foyle kept me informed of what was happening in my city and beyond, and this helped me maintain my sanity at times. At school, I had always had an interest in politics, history, and current affairs, so a seed in my mind began to grow. Maybe I could retrain as a journalist and seek employment in something I was passionate about. So one day I nervously made a phone call to the Northwest Regional College, unsure and still plagued with doubts that maybe I did leave it too late in life. Maybe I was too old to be able to keep up with what they taught in college nowadays. But that one phone call would mark the beginning of my learning journey and change the course of my career in life. After meeting the course coordinator, all of my fears were put to rest. I joined the Diploma in Professional Journalism course and soon found out that there were other students, even older than me, who were determined not to let any preconceived notions of adult learning hold them back. Encouraged by the teaching staff, rather than a hindrance, I personally found my life experience to be an asset that I could use to drive me forward on my learning journey. I was also lucky enough to get paid freelance shifts with a local newspaper as a result of my studies, and to see real journalists ply their trade day in, day out gave me a huge boost, both to my learning and with my self-confidence. I had a real thirst for knowledge and learning by the time I completed the course, and I would go on to complete other media-related courses in places such as the Nerve Centre here in Derry, doing things like enhancing my video editing skills. My journey would see me make the switch from traditional journalism to working in communications for a comms and marketing agency here in town. My time at Gray's Communications increased my learning and professional skills astronomically, and today I now work for the Bogside and Brandywell Health Forum as a full-time communications officer for their Spring Social Prescribing project, which operates across Northern Ireland and Scotland. In the space of a few years, each avenue I went down furthered my learning and skills, and I can honestly say that I never would have had the confidence to speak in a room full of people such as I am doing today if it wasn't for the courses I did and the learning I achieved. Like a tree that grows, I'm never entirely sure what direction my learning will take me next, but so far, learning has opened so many doors for me, doors that I wrongly thought had been closed. Things like age or gender should never be a barrier to learning. Folks, it's a pleasure to speak in front of you today and see how learning can improve not just individuals, but entire cities. I'm a huge believer in the power of lifelong learning. And while the best time may have been 20 years ago, believe me, we can all start planting our own learning trees today. Thank you.
Kieran, many thanks for that. I don't know about you, but just listening to that, what an inspirational guy Kieran is, you know, and I think we can sit here and talk about festivals and opportunities and what's coming up, but Kieran really is an example of just the difference that it can make. So thank you so much for talking to us, Kieran. Next this morning, you may have spotted him in the audience. It's my pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to welcome to the stage Dr. Stephen Sexton. His book of poems, If All the World and Love Were Young, published in 2019, won various awards, including the Forward Prize for Best First Collection. He has been published in many UK and Irish journals and American publications as well. He has travelled the world with his work, and we're delighted that he is joining us and taking time to speak to us this morning. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Stephen Sexton to the stage.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm not used to being, I guess I am doctor, but I'm not used to hearing it. You know, there are no medical emergencies in which I can help. It's literature, not medicine. But thank you very much, Eve, for the introduction. It's lovely to be with you all. It's lovely, to speak to you at all. And thank you, Michelle, for that lovely invitation. So to everyone's favourite part of Tuesday morning, the bits with the poems. I don't know what you do with your Tuesday mornings. This is what I do, but I'm glad to share a part of my morning with you. And just if I may say, it's a lovely honour to be translated into any language, but I have a particular fondness for this one. Thank you both very much for doing it. I hear poetry is notoriously difficult to translate, so thank you very much for your efforts, because I don't know what I'm doing most of the time, so I'll be curious to see what happens. It's a lovely thing to be part of this event and part of this project. I mean, what I do is work with language. That's something that's not new. That's something that exists only through communities of people, through people interacting with each other, studying, yes, but also, you know, living their lives, experiencing the world through language, sharing that conversation, all of these things. The best stories are often the older ones. So I'm very aware that I'm part of a very long history, a very long community of language, which I think is sympathetic to what this cause is. So I appreciate its value immensely, and I'm very glad to say a few things. As I say, one of the things that I don't know what I'm doing most of the time. I'm writing poems because they're fun, because they're kind of silly, and one of the things that I've kind of enjoyed with education, with the experience of working with friends and colleagues. One of the things that education learning allows for me is silliness, is imagination, is that capacity to be imaginative. That's one of the most valuable things. This is a long way of saying I don't know what's happening in these two poems that I'm going to read. You might forgive me, but I thought they were silly. I thought they were kind of fun, and it's lovely to share them with you. So 2 poems. They're not very long. The first of these is by me. The second of these is by the poet Colette Bryce, and it's set just outside this building. I thought it would be appropriate to read it. So I'll read the first of these. What can I tell you? I think it's about language mostly. I think it's about language and inheritance and stories and that sort of thing. What it's actually about, I guess, in the text of the poem is imagining what a city's like if a zoo was liberated somewhere. So imagining where I was living at the time had a balcony, and sitting at that balcony, imagining what if the street was full of animals. It's really about being obliged to stay inside one's house and see the world as someone who's somewhat confined. I wrote this about 2016, so it just so happens that it corresponds to our recent experiences of living inside and thinking about the world outside. So the name of the poem is The Curfew. The radicals sprung the locks that night, hurrah, and their lovely collarbones were almost moonly. Rhinos shrieked and bellowed, elephants tromboned, and the animals nosed into town. Sunrise to sunrise and sunrise we kept indoors. If you can't count your onions, what can you count? My grandfather used to say. He said a lot of things. Among the other miners, he was legendary, when no more than the thought of the pink crumple of his infant daughter's body came to mind. A glow would swell in the pit. The men would mayhem bauxite by the light his tenderness emitted. Some of me lived inside her even then. The memorial fountain says nothing of the weeks before the rescue failed, but mentions God, which, as my grandfather used to say, is just the name of the plateau you view the consequences of your living from. Or something like that. He said a lot of things. He grew wise and weary as an albatross and left for that great kingdom of nevertheless. It would have pleased his handsome shoulders to watch this grizzly scoop for salmon in the fountain of his friends, or the Bengals, or the shakedown squad of chimpanzees who bang and bang on the grocery window. One by one, 11 miners starved to death. In the streets, they collar or tranquilize the ocelots and run a spike of ketamine through the plumbing in the fountain. Dromedaries blue mood around the pub, aloof under their reservoirs of fat. I don't sleep, but oh, plateau, these days of violence have been my happiest. Even a cabbage is not without desire, my grandfather said one day. And now among the animals I feel under my wings the words for things I thought I knew departing, and I understand him. Now, what that means, I have no idea. I once had a lovely conversation with Mary-Louise Muir, and she said, you must have had a very interesting grandfather. And I said, no, I made it up. That's what I do. I make up these stories about things. But what that's about, I don't know. But it's a purely imaginative kind of experience that brought me a lot of pleasure. But I'd like to read a poem by the poet Colette Bryce, who is very much from Derry. She's a marvelous, marvelous poet. Many of you will know her, I think. She's also just got one of the most prestigious jobs in poetry publishing. She's now the editor of Picador Poetry Press. They publish Caroline Duffy, for instance. But yes, a very celebrated person and the best person for the job, and in fact many jobs. But this is a very interesting poem. It's also kind of silly. It's very serious, I think. Although I understand maybe that my definition of silly is different from yours. I find these very silly, but that's another thing. So this poem takes place, as the poem says, right outside in Guildhall Square. And what it's concerned with is a magic trick. The full Indian rope trick is the name of the poem. And that's the one which you might know, where a rope is thrown up into the sky, and usually a small boy climbs the rope and he disappears. And moments later he reappears in a basket, next to the rope, somehow having disappeared and reappeared. It's a poem about leaving and staying. But I think an extraordinarily moving poem. But I'll read this and thank you again for your attention, and thank you very much, Michelle, for the invitation. So, Colette Bryce, The Full Indian Rope Trick. There was no secret murmured down through a long line of elect. No dark fakir, no flutter of notes from a pipe, no proof, no footage of it, but I did it. Guildhall Square, noon, in front of everyone. There were walls, bells, passers-by, then a rope thrown, caught by the sky, and me, young, up and away, goodbye. Goodbye, goodbye, thin air, first try. A crowd hushed, squinting eyes at a full sun. There on the stones, the slack weight of a rope coiled in a crate, a braid 18 summers long, and me, I'm long gone. My one-off trick, unique, unequaled since. And what would I tell them, given the chance? It was painful. It took years. I'm my own witness, guardian of the fact that I'm still here. Thank you.
Dr. Stephen Sexton, many thanks. I think I might have to take up that idea of Poetry Tuesdays. What a way to start the day. I think if we all started our day that way, it would be a much calmer outcome, perhaps. But ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our speaker section this morning. But we'll now continue into our panel discussion, welcoming members of the Irish Network of Learning Cities. Delighted to have those members here with us this morning, and we again thank you so much for taking time to join us. It's always lovely to hear from you. Please feel free to ask questions during this discussion. It's all about the power of lifelong learning, of course. If you see me with a microphone, it's not me trying to hold the microphone. I'm trying to ask you if you want to ask a question or whatever. Please just raise your hand and let me know, and we can come around to you. It'd be lovely to have others just join the discussion as well with your experiences too. So I'll welcome Gareth Harvey. Lovely to have Gareth here this morning, of course, Chair of the Derry City and Strabane Region Learning City Network. I let Gareth introduce to you your panel this morning.
Hi everyone. I realise I'm sitting on my own here at the minute, so without further ado, I'll introduce some of the other speakers in the panel. My name is Gareth Harvey. I'm the chair of the Derry and Strabane Learning City Region. I've been put in place this year, and it was a complete honour to be working alongside all the other network members within the Derry and Strabane region, and really getting to hear those stories and learning from them as well. But the other thing about this role is to hear from all the other Irish Learning City networks, and to hear from their expertise, their experience, their challenges as well. So we have Dennis Barrett from the Cork Learning City Network. We also have Emer Brophy from the Limerick Learning City, Danny Power from Belfast Learning City, and also Emer Murphy from the Dublin Learning City, if they'd like to join me as well. So, as Eve mentioned, we will be looking for questions as well, but we'd also like to hear, after we speak and have our discussion, we'd also like to hear some of your comments as well, some of your thoughts around the power of lifelong learning, your experience as well of lifelong learning, and also what you're looking forward to with the Learning Festival as well. So I've given myself a wee introduction there, so I think we'll start down at the end with Emer, if you want to just introduce yourself and who you are and where you're from.
Absolutely, thanks Gareth. My name is Emer Murphy and I'm the coordinator of Dublin Learning City. We are a collaboration of 6 higher education institutes in Dublin, and we partner with Dublin City Council and a couple of the education and training boards. So we were established in 2019, so still a relatively new Learning City, so delighted to be here amongst other Learning City members and friends also to learn from everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Emer. Dennis?
Thanks, Gareth. Just to say it's a real joy to be here among you and to thank you for the invitation to be here. So I'm Dennis Barrett. I'm the coordinator of a very wide range of partners in Cork. In 2002, some very wise people pulled together a plan, and there were only 7 goals in that plan. One of the goals was to make Cork a city of learning. And the elements of the plan were to recognise all forms of learning, formal, non-formal and informal, to open up access to everybody and to be recognised nationally and internationally. But the real killer sentence was to create a culture of lifelong learning in the city. So that was a dream, an idea, a vision from 2002, and that really has guided our work as a city ever since. So my own story, I started my working life as a youth worker, and then I went on to be a community worker. I went on to be a teacher, an adult educator involved in community education, and I did a bit of outdoor pursuits on the side. So when the opportunity came to work in the middle of all those partners and help build networks and partnerships and grow ideas like learning neighbourhoods, learning workplaces, to work with UNESCO, to host seminars and conferences, and to connect with other cities, I really feel like one of the luckiest people alive to have the chance to do that. So that's my story. We started our festival in 2004. It started very small, and the kind of radical idea was to make learning fun again, because the idea that learning belongs in schools is something I think we've all been institutionalized into thinking, and to take it back out into the community and to remember the fun and the joy, and a festival is a brilliant way of doing that. So congrats to Derry on having your first in-person festival. And just to say, Derry were the first city globally to have a virtual lifelong learning festival. So you've really made huge progress in a few years, so congratulations to yourselves.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you. And obviously when the first Learning Festival was being planned, we didn't envisage it being completely digital, but you know, I think it showed the agility and that learning ourselves of trying to turn this to a digital festival. And of course, the festival itself will be that hybrid. There will be those in-person events. We're going to maintain that digital feel to it as well. So thank you. Danny, you want to introduce?
I'm Danny Power. You might discover from the accent I'm not originally from Belfast, but I've been living there for 37 years, so still a blow-in. I'm a bit like Stephen. I don't know what I'm doing most of the time either, to be fair. So, but I chair the Learning City efforts. We're a Learning City since 2018. We're now part of the Community Planning Partnership under the Job, Skills and Education kind of section of it, although we see the Learning City is spanning across the range of the community planning process. So an interesting time that we're going through at the moment. My own journey, apart from the Larne-Strabane ferry, I think I should have turned left when I turned right. I'm not really sure where I would have ended up. But I ended up in an area in Belfast called Divis, and ended up nearly very quickly being part of a demolition campaign of the Divis Flats complex. So that's kind of where my community journey started. I've been involved in community learning for that period of time, primarily campaigning and lobbying around the lack of investment in community learning, I may add. But interestingly, for the last 11 years, up until last year, I was a health commissioner, and I ended up centrally part of the Health and Social Care Board's commissioning process. So I went kind of full circle from community learning to the health service, and then I'm back to community learning again. So I have an interesting, I think, perspective on how the system works And for me, the purpose of Learning Cities, beyond what everybody else has already said, is the idea of connecting efforts and being able to use our assets and resources to change people's lives. And that means that we have to try and look at organisational learning as much as individual learning, and how we actually plan and use our resources in the best possible way. I believe in lifelong learning. I actually didn't go through university, but I blagged my way onto a master's in, I think it was 4 years ago now. I didn't go through the degree process. I thought I was clever enough just to jump straight in at the deep end, and I think I got embarrassed once or twice during the process, but I came out the other end of it with a master's in community planning. So I believe what I say, and I believe in the power of people changing people's lives for the better. Organisationally and kind of planning-wise, I don't think we're that good at joining the dots. So that's kind of why I'm involved.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you. And Emer?
Well, good morning, everybody. I just put out a tweet earlier, and I put in a picture of my walk this morning over the walls, the Derry girls, the historic Guildhall, and then we were chatting about apprenticeship with the guys from Donegal at the table, and then we were talking about skills development, and then Dr. Stephen came along and did the poetry, and we had the girls dancing, and I just said, you know, isn't it wonderful to be in a discussion around lifelong learning, which is apprenticeship, skills development, poetry, music, art, all the things that bind us together in learning and that remind us that we need skills development, we need to make money, and we need to, you know, pay our way in life, but we also need to nourish the soul. I had a granddad who did say a lot of things. Now, you made him up, but I just loved the poem. I just thought it was really lovely the way, you know, he said a lot of things. And you can say a lot of things about lifelong learning, but it's just wonderful to be part of this network of lifelong learning cities throughout the island. Michelle, the invite, thanks again. It's lovely to be here. And it's a lot about relationship building and seeing what we're doing in other cities. We're doing a lot of things very similarly, and we're doing a lot of things differently. And for somebody like me who's made my career in further ed and lifelong learning, listening to Kieran is always great, because part of my work involves the cut and thrust of arguing about budgets and arguing with the council about governance, and, you know, arguing with people back at home like the university about we should have more informal learning and formal learning. And I work for the Education Training Board, and it's about apprenticeships and skills development. But Kieran reminds you that what you do is right, and you should have those arguments and debates, and we should, as multi-agencies, come together and thrash it out so that we can get the funding and get the policy to enable and enhance people's lives, and they can benefit from lifelong learning. So it's just a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be part of the discussion. And Cork went first, so imitation is a sincere form of flattery. They first got their learning award. I always say that, just we followed very close behind in 2017, and the rest of you are following, which is great. So it's lovely to be here, and thanks for the invite.
Thank you. So, as you've heard throughout the morning, we have this theme, the power of lifelong learning. And sometimes, you know, it's really hard to understand what actually is lifelong learning. What does that mean? A lot of us in our careers and in our education, we focus learning on, I must learn this so that I can get that job, that I can learn that skill so I can do that thing. But as we discuss, whether within our city networks or individually with our individual city networks, we also focus on, it's not just about those outcomes, that grade, that education. While that's great, we also focus on what can learning do for the person, the individual, and indeed what can learning do for the city. So with that in mind, we wanted to have an opportunity to hear from the other city members and their opinions of lifelong learning, and any stories or any thing that they have heard about has impacted either individuals or indeed the city. And as I mentioned, you know, Cork is the I was going to say the grandfather here, but the first Irish learning city that came in. So Dennis, can you share, when you hear that term power of lifelong learning, what are you feeling it's meant for yourself, certain individuals, or indeed Cork as a city?
Thanks, Gareth. So when I was asked to think about this, one person came to mind straight away. Her name is Eileen Matthews, and I can safely say, if I meet Eileen, Eileen will kill me, because Eileen has made me promise that she will be on the buses in Cork. So that's a long story. It started out when I started in community education, and I had an opportunity, because they weren't sure what the job should be, to go and meet all of the groups in the city. And I was wondering, what is this? What have I done? I moved from Waterford back to my home city of Cork, and here I was. They weren't sure what the job was, and I was going around speaking to people in community settings who were offering adult education and community education of all sorts. So one of the stories I heard there was that the very first course a particular leader in a very powerful community in the city had done was a course on women's studies with UCC. And those courses were gone. They didn't exist anymore. So a couple of years later, there was a new director of adult education in UCC, and we had a cup of tea, and he said, "What can we do? I want to do something." And I said, "Well, this is something I heard from a woman in Ballyfihan. That's a community we'll come back to. And would you consider doing women's studies diplomas in the communities again?" He said, "Well, there's no funding for that now. I'm not sure how we'll do it, but we figured a way of doing it." So we linked with a community in the city, which when I was growing up as a teenager, you would be afraid to go there after hours. That was the reputation it had. That community is a thriving community, brilliant community spirit. And one leader there said, "Yes, I think we can host it here, and I think I know a lot of women who would be interested in this." Now, the year is important, because this was 2012, so the financial crash 2008 and then the subsequent cuts across services were at their height, and it was all about activation, learning for the job. So why would a group of women want to do women's studies instead of computer science or whatever else? But we stuck with that idea, and the course was put out on offer, and there were 25, we looked for 12, there were 25 women wanted to do that program. So what happened then? So Eileen Matthews was one of those women. Eileen, very, very wise woman, grandmother, and she'd been involved in community work for many, many years. She was able to teach more than learn from that course, but she was happy to be part of it. There was a woman and her daughter did that course. There were community workers, youth workers, and women who wanted the opportunity. There was a hunger for, maybe, as Kieran said, having missed opportunities previously in life. This was a chance in their own area. So that program went on. They did a certificate and they followed on to do a diploma. And then what happened? So gradually things in the area, opportunities came up, and that group were well placed for them. One of those women became a city councillor. A group of the women became researchers with UCC again. They went out and knocked door to door, and the response rate for that particular research project was off the scale because it was built on trust and local relationships. One of the women really got an appetite for learning and went on to do more programs in youth and community studies. So she's a community worker, a professional community worker in her own community. Back to Eileen Matthews. So one of the ideas we had for the conference that we were hosting in 2017, which was a huge challenge for us as a city. The previous time it had been in Mexico City, and the time before that was in Beijing. So UNESCO had selected Cork because of the festival and the connectedness that they saw in our city. They'd selected Cork to host the third. And we had thought about this amazing roadshow was coming to town. UNESCO is a fantastic kind of inspirational brand. I'm sure everyone wants to hear about this. So we tried to get the story out, and nobody was interested. It was just another conference. But we were asked, and we were struggling during that summer, we were asked, how can you communicate what's the value of this? And we started thinking of the individuals' personal stories. And Eileen's was one of those. We asked Eileen, would she mind going on the radio? So in Drive Time Radio, Eileen told her story. And the following week, the UNESCO conference was starting. And Pascal Sheehy, who was a significant correspondent for the whole RTE suite, said, I'll cover the conference if you get me an interview with Eileen, who I heard on the radio, and if Eileen will let me interview her in her kitchen. So Eileen didn't want to do that. She was embarrassed. She thought, I don't want my neighbours looking in the door of my kitchen. But because she's part of the whole, that big community that we have built gradually over the years, in her own area, which is now identifying itself as a learning neighbourhood, So that part of the city that I was afraid to walk in as a young man, that's a learning neighbourhood now and proudly putting its badge out. So Eileen gave Pascal Sheehy the interview in her kitchen, and on the 6 o'clock news, the day of the conference, it was Eileen's story. It was what was projected into the rooms of everyone who was watching the news that evening. But as part of that conference, we'd also ran a campaign called Faces of Learning, and we borrowed or robbed the idea from a city in the north of Spain, Vitoria-Gasteiz, and to promote their green capital bid, they asked ordinary citizens to get their portrait taken and to be agreeable to having them on posters throughout the city, because they felt that would really communicate the power of being a green city more than the mayor or celebrities or any one of these well-known faces. So we thought this idea was really, really powerful, and we did the same. We asked the community of Knocknaheeny, the community of Ballyphehane, so those 2 areas were the first 2 learning neighbourhoods, would they get their portraits taken? So a whole lot of people said yes, we're happy to do that, and Eileen was one of those. And then when the conference was in town, we thought we can put some of the portraits on the buses and have the buses travelling through the city to make everyone aware that we're now in this special place, in this global network, but it's all about our own people. So Eileen wasn't one of the faces, so Eileen will kill me. That's the sense I have of it. People went on to go in all sorts of different directions, and that community still hosts 3rd level programs in a community setting to this day. And it has changed lives in ways that we will never understand. Sometimes people do it for the love of it. Sometimes it's about redressing a gap maybe that they feel they've had. But anytime you walk into that room, it is just full of fun, full of intense conversations, and the natural intelligence, the natural wisdom that's in the community. That's what's happening in that place. So,
thank you, Dennis.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you. And you mentioned there about the value of learning. In my background, I'm a learning development manager with Allstate Northern Ireland, and you always hear, what's the return on investment of learning? And you can measure that by evaluation surveys. Was that person reskilled into a role? Did that person gain that promotion? But to hear the story about changing people's lives, like how do you measure that? How do you measure someone's confidence improving, someone going on the radio or getting on the side of a bus? Those are the intangible things that we want to promote as well with our Learning Festival, which provides that window of opportunity for you to look into the type of offerings that are throughout the whole Derry and Strabane region, that run day in, day out throughout the whole year. Emer, go on to you in terms of the power of lifelong learning in Dublin. What has that meant to you and your city?
Well, I think it's really building on what Dennis mentioned about celebrating learning no matter where it's happening, whether that be in an informal or formal setting. Any learning setting where someone's showing up, it shows that they are doing their best and that it's the right place for them to be. So I know ourselves in Dublin, and you mentioned this in your opening, that we're very lucky in Ireland, or the island of Ireland, that we have an education system that's well funded and relatively modern. But not everyone resonates with the education infrastructure that we have. So it's about celebrating learning that's happening in communities also and in families, and about building confidence as well. So I know in Ireland, and we're all aware that we are educated to suit jobs and careers, and it's very much points-based as well. And I know from my own experience, my career path was based on what points I received in the Leaving Cert. But of course, that's not the pathway for everyone. And we were at a conversation with Cork Learning City last week, and someone made the point about how do we educate people and educate learners to live in the world rather than just preparing them for the workplace. And of course, preparing for the workplace is also important, but it's also to be citizens of the world, and particularly in such a rapidly changing world, and as we see with unprecedented events such as a global pandemic, but also a huge transition as well in our demographic as we see Ukrainians arriving in Ireland. So how do we manage that, and climate change as well? And so that learning happens in education infrastructures, but also in social settings. And in order to have inclusive education, it's very important to remember that that is very much based in social changes and transforming our attitudes and beliefs towards contemporary education and adapting. So, it's great to see, and Emer mentioned it, the different types of learning in this room. We saw dancing, we're seeing photography up from people of all ages, from all walks of life, from all different places. And it's great to see, a huge array of people here as well, and learning as well. So our main mission in Dublin is to champion the fact that learning can happen anywhere, at any time, at any age. And something that I find very significant about a learning city is that there's a place for everyone there, no matter what type of learning you want to engage with. And a festival really encompasses that, because there's different types of learning for everyone. Also championing what we have and celebrating what we have in our education infrastructure, but also recognising and celebrating what exists in our communities and around us.
Yeah, thank you. That the mantra, and you see it on the advertisements, yes, learn for employability, but learn for fun, learn for confidence, and that even just that relearning element that Kieran demonstrated through his story about, going back in and relearning new skills as well. Emer, in terms of Limerick, what was the power of learning? What does that mean to you, and the impact it's had on your city and your learning city?
It's such a great question, and just listening to the others, Limerick is a tale of two cities. Unemployment in the Midwest in Ireland is running at 4%. So despite all the pandemic, things was going to be all terrible, it's actually running at 4%, which is very good. But in a city like Limerick, in the 19 economic black spots, it's running at 12.5%. So my colleague Yvonne Lean is here with me, and Yvonne works with the Paul Partnership. And the Paul Partnerships and the partnerships within a city like ours, work with the education bodies. And what we're trying to do is look at that whole intergenerational poverty and intergenerational issues with education. A learning city allows us to weave, and I suppose I'll use that analogy, to weave off the apprenticeship system, the skills development system, to acknowledge that university fact-based learning for level 8 degrees on the framework is not the answer for everybody. And as we are going through the fourth industrial revolution, we're probably out the other side of it at the moment, your skills that you learn on a computer science degree in 2022-26 will be obsolete by 2030. So it's about, we have to all the time reskill and upskill. And I think just to home in on two specific projects, we have a funding through the Exchequer for communities mitigating against community disadvantage. That has given us over $500,000 into the city of Limerick to spend across a number of different communities. But we also have examples of learning ambassadors and learning neighbourhoods. You all have them. There's nobody in this, you have them in Derry, we go to European networks, they have them over there. Everybody is doing very similar things and they benefit. The point I'd like to make is a bigger point, which is that as long as we're never tied into a policy development that's based on numbers and KPIs around numbers, that's very difficult, because we just talked about this last night and we talked about it earlier this morning. It sometimes takes a long time for somebody who's far away from the marketplace to come to that point. It might take years to come through your lifelong learning journey. Kieran mentioned he never thought he'd be able to stand up in a room and give a speech to all the people. So we need to stay with people on their journey and not make it about, or to 15 people, move on, there's the funding, and what do they do? We need to say, well, maybe that took us a few years to do. And maybe in that particular community, to get 3 people to the workplace where 3 generations of them have not worked before, or where there's huge addiction issues, or where there's huge dysfunctional issues through no fault of their own sometimes, through dint of circumstance and just rotten luck sometimes. We need to be very cognizant of that. So I think learning cities are about everything everybody's spoken about, everything we're all doing and doing our best at. But to me, the real rub would be if we could keep policy around allowing us to continue that and continue that holistic development and not become a very business model that talks about results. And results then you see have to be in a year, and you can't do anything in lifelong learning in a year because it's a continuum.
Yeah.
So that's
and often the learning cities help those people take the first step into learning, whether it's into formal learning, whether it's into a 6-week course or program at a community centre. That helps them build their networks, build their confidence to maybe take that next step as well. I think you see the middle there, home ground. I'll be completely honest, when I first moved to Derry, I didn't know there was an organisation called Allstate in Derry. You know, and so now we have this website that's actually showing what are the type of companies that are available in this region and helping people through the learning cities where we support awareness. What are the type of roles, what are the type of companies, organisations, training providers available in the city? As Emer mentioned, we don't know what job is going to be here in 6 years' time, but how do we promote and help people think about their next step in their career, in their education, to think about what's available on their doorstep as well. So thank you, Emer. Danny, in Belfast, the power of lifelong learning.
I suppose it's all of the above. For me, you know, what learning means to me and what I think it means to our city is about making change and making a difference in people's lives. And that always has to be at the forefront of your thinking and your kind of working life. A lot of us would be involved in planning of services, planning of programs, initiatives, activities, and quite often the organisational end takes over, and you become consumed with what organisations are doing, and sometimes you actually forget that it's about the impact on people, and it's the impact on people in communities, and then it's communities as part of a city, and then it's the city as part of the region, as the region as part of the country, and all that kind of stuff that goes with it. But the truth is, though, if our efforts alone, our kind of goodwill was enough, then we would have solved many of our problems a long time ago. So the reality of it for me in my life and in what we do in the city and across the learning cities is we have to work across organisations and across sectors, and we have to do it in a way where we take the poor financial systems which measure achievement by how much things cost, and start looking at actually what is the impact on people. Because if you think about, and it's the same, you know, all parts of the island, but I know in the north, the system of government we have is very much on outcomes are on individual departmental lines, and budgets are allocated across departmental lines. And for anybody in here, and I know there are some in departments, it's almost like sometimes never the twain shall meet, and that's our budget, and you can't be going near that. And the reality of it, if I go back to my early experiences, just as I got off that Langstrand ferry and dumped into the middle of Divis, the tail end of the demolition campaign, what we found was a community that was just angry. And yes, it was learning, but it was almost learning in learning how to be combative, learning how to challenge the system, learning how to win the battles, if you like. And it took me a long time to actually realize that we actually needed to move out of deprivation. The deprivation and conflict on its own wasn't enough. You couldn't hang your future on that. So how do you make it in a more progressive way? And I think learning holds the key. And certainly for me, again, learning is more about resilience. But resilience not in just that kind of always combating the negative, but how you use learning to look at progressive change. We always talk about joined up government and how you connect the dots, and how, you know, the public sector should be working for the public and not the communities working for the public sector. And we all know the challenges and all there around how we resource and how we finance things. But I think the Learning City has the opportunity to bring people together on a common agenda. And I know everyone probably here has heard all the rhetoric about outcomes-based accountability and the new way of working. But the real challenge in that is actually to, not only at an individual level, a community level, a family level, but how you organisationally make change, which then goes right back down into local communities to see the impact, and how people themselves are dictating the agenda. So it's not about what we think is the best thing for people. It's actually people themselves saying, this system works for me. Interestingly for me, because I spent the last 11 out of the 12 years in the health system, and I think, and don't be asking me questions about health because I'll be even more clueless. A very complicated system sometimes for not a great deal of benefit. But one of the things that I thought community and learning brought to that kind of agenda for me personally was the ability to translate what it meant and what difficult decisions meant for people and communities. And we spent most of those 11 years, 5 of which I was the chair of one of the commissioning groups. So in theory, in a relatively senior position, but quite challenging, because all we were told was how broken the health system was, and we had to try and learn to navigate a way of looking for the prize. And what was the prize? How do you make a difference? And whether you're at an organisational level or an individual level, it's about how you make a difference. So for me, that's the power of learning. It stretches from the individual right across your community, right across your city, right across your region. I know, like Kieran, I'm involved also in the Healthy Living Centre network. There's 29 of those centres across the region. We're involved in how you connect health and education, and quite often we take things and we put them in nice, neat boxes because it's easier and it's convenient and it's finance. But I think the challenge is, how do you look when you connect these things? Because they're not disconnected in people's lives. You know, people's lives are affected by all these things at the same time. And I think the challenge for what I call the system is how they look at that impact, particularly at a locality level. And there are a number of things at the minute that are happening, certainly in the northern context, but I suspect right across the island, where there are opportunities to bring learning to the fore and actually do things in a completely different way.
Thanks, Danny. And you used that word a few times about connection, and that's really a lot of things that we try to do with the Learning City to help connect the various learning opportunities that are available, but also people to that. Sometimes it's great, there's so much going on, but sometimes that's a bad thing, because there's so much going on, people don't know where to go or where to look. So to promote those learning opportunities through the festival that are promoted throughout the year as well is a terrific thing, connecting people to those learning opportunities. So we do have a bit of time if there's any, this is the nervous bit, any questions or comments. I think Noelle has her hand up in there.
Congratulations. It's just lovely to witness the journey that it has taken for the Learning City to evolve in an excellent work that everybody's been involved in. And I remember being here when there were conversations about the city pitching for being a learning city, and I know from experience working with, as part of the City of Culture and as part of the education community, how important that is. I want to make an acknowledgement here, because as part of I suppose, the supportive team of the Learning City, that the importance of, as you say, learning, but learning for life, learning through challenge, learning through grief, and the wisdom that, and the giants in the community. I think that was so well made, because as someone who's spent their life in education and, working within the education community, I know firsthand that all our learning is not exclusively within schools. The giants that are within our community are often people that have been isolated and, in fact, disenfranchised because of maybe some of the circumstances or experience they've had in their early educational opportunities. But I really want to pay tribute to the partnership. I want to pay tribute to not just the cross, the inter-party and so many different organisations that are involved in this Learning City, but also the commitment from across the island of Ireland as well. And I know because of your support that we've been able to bring the very first, and this is a pitch for the very first touring Learning City exhibition, which will be starting in Belfast and will be travelling across all of the learning cities, hopefully. And it is really about giving those that have been ill, those that may be terminally ill, those that have challenges, those that are living through grief. And I suppose really the culture of learning is about compassion, it's about resilience, it's about sharing stories, it's about celebrating life. And I know that there is huge benefits from working together. It's so obvious. I think there are huge opportunities in pooling resources and expertise. And I think the key thing is the wisdom and the compassion in ensuring that no one's left behind. So I just want to acknowledge firsthand from seeing and being part of the network that what you're doing is changing lives, changing hearts and minds, and in some cases saving lives. So I'd just like to acknowledge that. So thank you.
Thank you, Noelle. Thank you. Yeah, so great. As Emer mentioned as well, we sometimes have the mindset of learning is about getting that grade, getting that skill, but also learning is about feeling good about yourself or overcoming that day, that week, and maybe adapting to some difficulties as well. So, thank you. And, another plug for the Learning Festival. Again, there's lots of different things that we hope people will undertake. It's not just about learning a particular skill, but am I going to maybe meet people in that? Am I going to learn something new to help me overcome either any difficulties there? So anyone else? Any questions? Comments? No?
Derry definitely isn't one of those shy cities where nobody says anything. I know that for a fact, so I'm sure there's some burning hard question in there somewhere.
How you doing? It's Barry Dolan here from Mavis, and just wow to the room first of all. So listen, it's great to be involved and to be invited. Just a quick question, I suppose, to all the panelists. Looking at the barriers to lifelong learning, I suppose maybe some of the solutions as well. Have you any examples of sort of just real simple solutions that have worked for, I suppose, your cities and your areas to some of the barriers?
I think, you can go first.
Well, actually, if I could come in there, because in many ways a discussion like this, it's really good to give, examples on that there were solutions. So, I mean, we've had particular neighbourhoods which, say during the pandemic, they needed to communicate with, grandchildren and people abroad or whatever. So we, you use a government stream of funding, whatever it is. You buy the tablets, you get you get people the IT support, and you get them up, and they're able to talk to their grandchildren in Australia. That is life changing. And you don't need to write an academic paper with a whole load of wonderful examples. That is life changing to somebody who wasn't able to do that, having the confidence to ask for that, and is now communicating with their grandchildren. And the fact the tablet was free is an even bonus. So that to me is the role of community educators through whether the Education Training Board or through the university or through an access programme. Then if you look at diversity and equality, like we've had lots of newcomers into Limerick over the years, so it's actually how the funding worked for them and how they felt involved and included and how they felt part of those networks. So it was working very hard to include the intercultural networks and to include people so they could call Limerick their home. Well, they didn't have to like hurling and be raised in Limerick and be called Murphy or be called O'Brien or whatever. They could come from any country in the world and find a home. And I think that's really important. And we use different, there's too numerous to mention and you all use funding like that, but it's to use funding like that to its advantage. So I think those kind of examples whether it's particularly the digital skills. I mean, throughout the whole island, we're a highly educated group of people, but there is no doubt that our digital skills at all age groups fall very far behind. And I work with industry every day, and they actually talk about they want attitude and people with the right attitude. So I constantly tell people in all neighbourhoods in Limerick City, you don't have to go to UL. You don't have to have 550 points in your Leaving Cert. The whole Leaving Cert, I won't go into the Leaving Cert discussion now, that would take me all day. But you don't have to, people in industry want people who turn up on time, have attitude and are willing to learn. And sure, that's what a learning city is about. Yeah. So they would be the examples I could use. I mean, I'm sure the others might have some.
I think accessibility is obviously a barrier, and what I think a lot of learning cities do is make sure this isn't just a city centre initiative that's going to have a festival. If you look at the leaflet, there's going to be lots of opportunities for people to go all across the city, all across in Strabane as well, and further afield, but also with that hybrid approach still, to make sure that it's, as well as face-to-face, what are the digital opportunities? But again, the key thing is to help link people with what are the opportunities there, that it's not just, okay, you're over 16 years old, you can't go to school anymore. There's that, what are available, what are the adult learning opportunities for people as well. And also, I know in Derry and Strabane, Learning City, we've had some learning hubs and learning zones where we're trying to get the point across is around the transversal skills, the skills that, and Kieran's story around, starting in retail and completely changing your career, that's a big step. And often people, what skills have I learned in retail? Well, customer experience, timekeeping, working under certain pressures. No matter what industry, those are the skills that are needed. So trying to connect that to individuals to let them know that the skills that you're building up, whether in employment or school, those skills can go to any industry, and trying to make those connections to people. So I think definitely accessibility is not solved, but it's definitely still one of the barriers that we want to overcome. And Emer, I think you were, sorry.
just one example came to mind from Dublin. So last week we launched our first learning neighbourhood in the north inner city of Dublin. And touching on what Dennis spoke about is similar to Cork. That would have traditionally been an area of deprivation, and a huge barrier within that area was certainly confidence of the people there. So we gave the label as a learning neighbourhood, but the work was actually already being done in the neighbourhood long before we arrived, and connection was being made and learning was happening. But the people in that neighbourhood didn't necessarily see it as that they were already doing the work. But by, giving it the label of the learning neighbourhood and empowering people, I suppose, with that label, that, encouraged them that they were already doing the learning and they were already achieving what they saw as impossible or as that they weren't doing. So that was a really positive example. And now I know within that neighbourhood as well, there were people who were, aware of the positive impact they were making, but there was a lot of people who, by being part of a learning neighbourhood, it was acknowledging the great work they were already doing, and overcoming that confidence barrier that they had. So that would be a really positive example, and I know Dennis had touched on that as well about the various learning neighbourhoods that were in Cork.
Yeah, Dennis, you were going to add as well.
Yeah, thanks, Gareth. Just to echo a lot of what's been already said. One other example, just a good question, Barry, is an initiative we started in Cork last year. It's called Cork Access Network. So it emerged by pulling partners together around a seminar, which was Mitigating Against Educational Disadvantage, which is along Ron Seal Tin, to do exactly what it says in that, to mitigate against educational disadvantage. But that was the starting point, and that allowed us to invite partners to link together at a time when we were in lockdown. It was all on screen, with those various organisations and partners in the city who are already doing really brilliant work to reduce barriers and to remove barriers. And by bringing them together as a network, so there's over 200 members have joined along the way for various discussions and events. They've presented soapbox examples of what they do themselves, whether it is working with prisoners within the prison, or the partners or family members of prison outside the prison walls, whether it's working with people in addiction, working with migrants, or migrants working to promote their own learning. All those examples, there are so many in any city, and Derry is full of them as well. But creating the network and creating events, just like the festival, it really does a couple of things that are important. It gives the work visibility, and it shares good practice. And the visibility is within, from organisation to organisation. So you now have new partners working together and collaborating, but you also are creating visibility, like you do with the festival, to the community, to all the individuals out there to understand that work. And then crucially, that recognition brings motivation to do more and do better. So Cork Access Network is just, it's all online. If you want to have a look under our Cork Learning City website, you'll see examples of all the various partners there. But I know the room is full of brilliant people who are doing exceptional work to remove barriers and reduce barriers in Derry and Strabane here as well. And joining together is a powerful way to amplify that work and to motivate more of it to happen. So, thanks, Gavin.
I won't repeat. Dennis actually stole one of my lines, so I'll have to think of something else. But I suppose if I think about some of the work that we've done, and I was actually working with one of your partners in terms of the Impact Forum for Adult Learning. And last year, one of the things that we were constantly coming up against as a barrier was, how do you know this works? Everybody in the room's probably heard that argument many times. And quite often, unfortunately, the way you're told it works is by how much it costs. So the obvious thing is, how do you start to change the script? How do you start to change the narrative? So we got together with the Impact Forum and the Learning Work Institute, who are based in London. And last year we produced research around the links between learning and the impact on health and well-being. And the report's called Learn Well, Live Well, if anybody wants to look it up. And it had a number of case studies of very practical examples of different forms of learning and the impact, the very direct impact that it makes on people and communities. Spring was one of them. Deeds in the Cregan Centre, which was a project around dementia and learning. And we had a number of, obviously, I've mentioned 2 Derry ones, I suppose I should mention Belfast, shouldn't I really? A number of projects right across the region, but all of which were making that argument around the links and the impact of learning on health and well-being. So the narrative on learning is not, and I'm not disputing that employability and skills isn't a major factor in learning and should continue to be so. But the barriers to learning and the barriers to educational achievement, we need to understand as well. And some of those are rooted in health, and some of those are rooted in the environment. So we have to look at learning across the board. So that particular piece of research was about changing the narrative from just a skills and jobs-based argument, which is crucially important. But it was adding something a bit extra, because it's interesting when you go and look for the research to back up that kind of linkage. There actually isn't a lot of impact beyond the employability and skills debate. There is not a lot of research which backs up the value of learning across other areas of people's lives. There are loads of initiatives and projects. There's very little identifiable research when you look at that debate. So that was one thing that we felt contributes to the debate and has allowed us to go back into the community planning partnership and say, we're in the job, skills and education section of your community plan, but we're much more than that. And it has allowed us to have that debate across the infrastructure. We've having the debate, and I mentioned this earlier, so I may as well throw it in. For example, with DFC, there's a review of people in place, which is the neighbourhood and rail strategy, for example. So you talk about the value of learning in neighbourhoods with people in that context. You go to the health sector, and there's everybody will know the closure of the health board 2 weeks ago. A new structure replacing that, and a new structure very much talking about how we put decision making back in localities. So how does learning help to contribute to that debate, and how do we join the agendas in a way that it makes sense and you can go into the argument, into the debate with a strong focus on the impact on people? And I think that's where collectively the learning cities can and have done learn from each other about how to construct the arguments, make the debate, but also in terms of the power of partnership, in terms of lobbying and making decisions. Because ultimately, if Goodwill, and I said this earlier, if Goodwill done it on its own, then we would have solved the problems a long time ago. But we need to get clever about making the arguments. And I think that's partly where the learning cities can play such a crucial role.
Yeah. Thank you, Danny. And that, I know we're just speaking about the Irish Learning Network here, but this is a global learning network as well. So to hear the similar challenges, the similar things that happen across the globe, it also helps us to think about, overcoming barriers to learning as well. I think we have time for one more, if there is one.
Thanks so much. Siobhan McCarthy, I'm the coordinator of the Cork Lifelong Learning Festival, and I just want to say I'm so glad I know Michelle and all of the Derry organisers of the Learning Festival up in Derry Strabane region, because it's just so lovely to be in this beautiful room. Danny, I wanted to come back to what you said about learning holding the key, and I think that learning does hold the key to so many things. We're very lucky. Congratulations, by the way, to Derry on their upcoming In Real Life Festival. I'm hoping that I'll get back up the road for a wee look at that too. I do think that learning holds the key to so many things, to employability, to skills, to health, to well-being, to connection. And do you think, as a panel, that we're in a unique position at this time, post-pandemic, where people are recognising that learning goes beyond schools, that we've had an opportunity now to have to figure out how to make a Zoom call, how to do Teams, that people are recognising that learning comes outside of the classroom, and that we don't just stop when we get our degree or our master's, like Danny, but that we have to carry on and we have to learn in other ways. And also, the new awareness around well-being. Is it just me, or do we see a lot more people paying attention to well-being and how our well-being impacts our lives and did over the pandemic?
Yes, I think globally. If you look at the experiences of the global networks, and obviously when we look at health, we tend to edge towards, and particularly in the last 2 years, to the World Health Organization. And UNESCO always was the kind of educational, scientific wing, and never the twain shall meet. But I think you did see over the last 2 years a narrowing of the gap between the two, because whether you're talking at a global level or you bring it right down into what it means if you're in Creggan or Waterside or anywhere else, then the impact on people's lives isn't those issues aren't separated. But I do think the value of working together to understand that, to understand what we mean by outcomes and what that means for, if you're, and I'll pick on just because he was sitting at my table, if you're Pascal and you're sitting in Department for Communities, what that means when you're planning out your initiatives, your programs, your agenda, and how that connects to the efforts of others in the same, who are dealing with and working with the same communities, and how you connect those things. So I do see some change, and particularly during the pandemic, where, I mean, let's be honest, community learning, certainly in northern terms, but I think in southern terms as well, investment had been devastated throughout probably the 90s and the noughties, if you like. It was probably at its height during the early 90s to mid 90s, where certainly I was aware, and we were firing on all cylinders locally. But there was a disinvestment, and part of that was the system could do it better. And I think there's now a realization well, we're not out of COVID yet, but the kind of coming out of COVID recovery, if you like, there's a realization that actually where you make the best decisions and where you get the best results in local communities where people live. And I did deliberately say that there's a number of key policies, certainly in northern terms, and I suspect in southern terms as well, which are now talking about the value of communities, the value of localities. And if we take our experiences of learning, particularly over the last 2 years, then I think there's a massive place for learning, contributing to do things differently. Because again, if you do, I don't know the phrase, Dennis will probably tell me where it came from. You do what you've always done, you'll get what you always got. Then the truth is, you're going to tell me, aren't you?
Well, Roy Keane claims it, but maybe he didn't invent it.
Well, I heard it of a teacher in the Shankill area of Belfast, there you go. But I'm sure he nicked it of somebody else. But that's the reality. If you keep doing things the same way, then you can't expect different results. So we have to learn to do things differently, and that has to be, in all the vernacular of the day, that has to be scaled up to a point where you can actually really make a difference on an ongoing and a lasting way. Not things that make a difference that day and then are gone tomorrow. So how do you make a difference over a long period of time where, we're not unlike Limerick in a sense of Belfast has, areas of high deprivation which have been the same areas of deprivation for decades upon decades, going way back. And while some of the statistics have started to change, largely due to community efforts, it's still the same areas. And those types of inequalities in cities which see themselves as progressive isn't acceptable. So we need to do things differently. And we need to learn from each other about how we do that. So I think there is some hope for the future. And we go through periodically these opportunities that come up in terms of policy and whatever. I think some of that is now. So we have some opportunity. And if we don't do that, then we'll go to plan B, C, D, or whatever it is. But presumably we won't stop.
And then I think on your question about well-being, it's...
So well-being is at the heart of community planning, which is also partly why you'll hear it everywhere. The 11 community plans across the region, and then there's variations of those in southern terms. Well-being is at the absolute heart of the process. They're not quite sure what it means in many places across the system, and it's actually communities in many cases which are articulating what well-being means. So again, it's kind of a learning curve for the public sector, private sector, in terms of what that means to their lives, which are usually quite different, and the language is usually quite different. So I think the learning cities can contribute to changing that.
Yeah, I think well-being within organisations is it's no longer like drinks on a Friday. It's more of now a lot of organisations have wellbeing strategies and focus on that. It's, you know, how do we promote the well-being of our employees or the people that are working in our communities? How are we giving opportunities to employees as well to get out in the community? So you see a lot of organisations doing that now. So it's no longer this word of, yeah, that's half day on a Friday, off you go, that's well-being. It's actually, how do we make sure people feel good about coming into work, feel good about themselves, feel good in the communities? So I think there's much more of a strategic overview about well-being than maybe ever before. I do know, I'm thinking we're at time. I don't know if there's one more comment. Did I see a hand up? No. Okay. Yeah, so first of all, thanks to Emer, Dennis, Danny and Emer for first of all joining us here, but also sharing your insights, not just today, but throughout all our meetings throughout the year. It's definitely helping support the Derry and Strabane Learning City, and really appreciate hearing from all your successes, all your initiatives. It really helps us. So really thank you for joining us today. Thank you. Before we go, can everyone just put their hand up a wee second? Just one hand up, please. So, hands up if you're going to sign up for one of these programs. Fantastic. Okay. Thanks very much. So, really, thank you. Thanks, Eve. Thanks.
Gareth and the panel, thank you so much. So many inspirational stories, and I think it is good just to open the floor and have that little bit of a discussion, just as to different people's experiences as well. And I think it's also lovely to notice, as a proud Strabane girl myself, you know, this is not, we may have a learning city, however, so many people in the surrounding areas also get to benefit from this, you know, the likes of Dungiven, the likes of Strabane, you know, this is for people in other areas as well. So a special thanks to all our speakers this morning. I know I keep using that word inspirational, but I really do think it's appropriate this morning, just talking and listening to everybody. I'd also like to give a special thanks to the members, the LCN members who are here today. Noel McLinden, Gillian Moss, Christine O'Kane, Paul Haslam, Alison Wallace and Siobhan Quinn. And again, another special mention to our panel, just making the way. Some of them had a little further trip than I did from Strabane this morning. So big thanks, always appreciated. I'll give you a little bit more information about our event coming up very, very shortly. But closing for us this afternoon, I'd like to introduce the junior signing choir from Hands That Talk. Now, if you're not too familiar with Hands That Talk, it's a deaf-led cross-community charity, established, just a wonderful charity that really hopes to improve the quality of life for the deaf community and those with hearing loss here in the Northwest. So please welcome your choir this almost afternoon, this morning. like to be efficient with our time, and I know everybody's really busy this morning. I suppose I'll use this wee opportunity just to close. So, the junior signing choir from Hands of Talk will take us up to the close today. And just a reminder, the record-breaking event, it's being held in the Peace Garden, just on Foyle Street, so it's not too far away. So maybe it's on your way to the car. So if you just want to stop off on the way past. It is a wonderful event, and we really we would love you to take part in it as well. Don't forget, you do still have time also to take part in this year's festival. I know a lot of you are very much involved in it, and hope this morning just inspired, enthused, energised everybody, just to give us a little bit of an idea of why we are actually here. So on behalf of everybody here and the organisers, thank you so much for taking the time this morning to join us.
Darling, just died. I found a love for me. Darling, just died. I found a love for me. For me. Darling, just died right in. Follow my lead. Well, I found a girl, beautiful and sweet. Well, I never knew you were the someone waiting for me. 'Cause we were just kids when we fell in love, not knowing what it was. I will not give you up this time, darling, just kiss me slow. Your heart is all I own, and in your eyes you're holding mine. Baby, I'm dancing in the dark, you between my arms, barefoot on the grass, listening to our favorite song. When you said you looked a mess, I whispered underneath my breath, but you heard it, darling, you look perfect tonight. Well, I found a woman stronger than anyone I know. She shares my dreams. I hope that someday I'll share her home. I found a love to carry more than just my secrets, to carry love, to carry children of our own. We are still kids, but we're so in love, fighting against all odds. I know we'll be alright this time. Darling, just hold my hand, be my girl, I'll be your man. I see my future in your eyes. Baby, I'm dancing in the dark, you between my arms, barefoot on the grass, listening